The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the dusty main street of Silver Creek, Colorado, kicking up clouds of dirt that settled on the hem of Lillian Carter's already worn dress. The year was 1875, and Lillian had traveled nearly 1,000 miles with nothing but a small carpetbag containing her meager possessions and a letter promising her a new life as the bride of a prosperous frontier businessman. Lillian stepped down from the coach, her legs unsteady after the long journey. At 22, she had left behind the poverty and memories of the New York tenements where she'd struggled to survive after her parents' deaths. The advertisement in the newspaper had seemed like divine providence. Respectable businessman seeks gentle bride of good character to share in prosperity of growing Western Township. She brushed the dust from her skirts and tried to tame her auburn hair that had come loose during the journey. The main street of Silver Creek consisted of a general store, a saloon, a small church, and various other establishments typical of a growing frontier town. Mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow despite the late spring warmth. "Miss Carter?" A man in an expensive suit approached her, his face pinched with disapproval as he looked her up and down. "Yes, Mr. Hargrove." Lillian recognized the name from their correspondence. "Indeed." He frowned, circling her as though inspecting livestock at auction. "Your letter indicated you came from respectable circumstances." Lillian swallowed nervously. "I wrote that I was of respectable character, sir. Which I am." "Look at you," he scoffed, gesturing to her mended dress and scuffed boots. "You appear to be nothing more than a pauper. I was expecting a woman of means, however modest. Someone who could contribute to our household and my standing in the community." The blood drained from Lillian's face. "Sir, I never claimed. This is unacceptable." Hargrove cut her off, his voice sharp with disgust. "I've paid good money to bring you here, and you arrive looking like this." He gestured dismissively at her appearance. "I'm a hard worker," Lillian said, her voice barely above a whisper as onlookers began to gather. The humiliation burned through her like fire. "I can cook, so keep accounts. I need a wife who brings something to this marriage beyond the clothes on her back," Hargrove interrupted. "I run the bank in this town. Appearances matter. You've misrepresented yourself, Miss Carter." "Please, Mr. Hargrove," Lillian said, feeling the stares of the townspeople. "I've come all this way." "That's hardly my concern." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a few coins, tossing them at her feet. "This should be enough for a night at the boarding house. The coach returns east tomorrow morning. I suggest you be on it." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Lillian standing alone with her carpetbag, the coins glinting in the dirt at her feet. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of everyone. With shaking hands, she bent to pick up the coins, acutely aware of the whispers around her. "Another mail order bride sent packing," someone muttered. "Third one this year," another voice added. Lillian straightened, clutching the coins in her palm. She had spent everything she had on the journey west. There would be no returning east, not with these few coins. But pride kept her chin high as she asked a nearby woman for directions to the boarding house. "Just down the street, dear," the older woman said, sympathy in her eyes. "Mrs. Wilson's place. Blue door." "Thank you," Lillian managed, walking away with as much dignity as she could muster. She had only gone a few steps when a deep voice called out behind her. "Miss, wait up a moment." Lillian turned to see a tall man approaching. His face was tanned from the sun, his brown hair touched with gold highlights. He wore simple clothes, a faded blue shirt, sturdy trousers, and a worn leather vest. Not a cowboy exactly, but clearly a man who worked outdoors. "Yes?" she asked warily. "Name's Elijah Morgan," he said, removing his hat. "I couldn't help overhearing what just happened." Lillian's cheeks burned with renewed humiliation. "It seems everyone did." "Hargrove's a fool," Elijah said bluntly. And not the first time he's done this either. So, I heard, Lillian replied, wishing she could disappear. Look, Mrs. Wilson's boarding house is full up with the cattle buyers in town, he explained. But my sister runs a small farm just outside of town. She could use some help, and she's got a spare room. It would give you time to figure things out. Lillian studied him, suspiciously. Why would you help me?
You don't know me.
Elijah's blue eyes crinkled slightly at the corners as he offered a small smile. Because my ma raised me right. And because Hargrove's the worst kind of man, one who thinks people's worth is measured by the coins in their pocket. I don't have much to offer in return, Lillian admitted. You said you can cook and keep accounts? When she nodded, Elijah continued. That's worth plenty out here. My sister Sarah's expecting her second child any day now. She could use the help. Lillian hesitated. The alternative was spending her last coins on a night's lodging before being stranded with nowhere to go. It's honest work, miss, Elijah assured her, seeming to read her concerns. Sarah's husband passed last winter.
Influenza.
She's been managing alone, but it's getting harder with the baby coming. Something in his straightforward manner and clear gaze convinced her. Thank you, Mr. Morgan. I would be grateful for the opportunity. Just Elijah, he corrected, taking her carpet bag despite her protest. My wagon's this way. He nodded toward a simple wagon tied up outside the general store. I need to collect a few supplies, then we can head out to Sarah's place. As Lillian followed him, she felt the weight of stairs on her back. In just 20 minutes, she had arrived in Silver Creek, been rejected by her intended husband, and accepted the help of a stranger. It wasn't how she had imagined her new beginning, but at least she wouldn't be sleeping on the street tonight. Inside the general store, Elijah greeted the shopkeeper with familiarity. Afternoon, Davis. Got that seed order ready? Sure do, Elijah, the balding man behind the counter replied, eyeing Lillian curiously. And who might this be? This is Miss Lillian Carter, Elijah said, showing none of the embarrassment Lillian felt. She'll be helping Sarah for a while. Understanding dawned on the shopkeeper's face. Hargrove's mail-order bride? I heard he turned her away not 10 minutes ago. News travels fast, Lillian murmured. It's a small town, Davis said with a shrug. Don't you worry about Hargrove. Man's got more money than sense. While Elijah settled his account and arranged for his purchases to be loaded into the wagon, Lillian wandered through the store, looking at the items for sale. It was well stocked for a frontier town, bolts of fabric, tools, preserved foods, medicines. She paused at a display of sewing notions, running her fingers over spools of thread. Ready? Elijah asked, appearing at her side. They walked outside where Elijah's wagon was now loaded with sacks of seed, some tools, and a small barrel of nails. He helped Lillian up onto the wooden seat before climbing up beside her and taking the reins. As they pulled away from the town, Lillian's emotions finally caught up with her. Silent tears slid down her cheeks, which she quickly wiped away, hoping Elijah wouldn't notice. It's all right to cry, he said quietly, eyes fixed on the road ahead. What Hargrove did was cruel. I'm not crying over him, Lillian said, finding her voice stronger than she expected. I'm crying because I sold everything I own to get here. I have nowhere to go back to. Elijah nodded. Then maybe it's good you're here instead. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon bumping along the rutted dirt road. Gradually, the town fell away behind them, replaced by open grassland and scattered stands of pine trees. The mountains loomed closer, their majesty taking Lillian's breath away despite her troubles. It's beautiful here, she said finally. That it is, Elijah agreed. Been here 8 years now. Came out after the war. You fought in the war between the states? Lillian asked. Elijah nodded, a shadow crossing his face. Union sighed. Was just a boy when I enlisted, not even 18. Came west afterward, looking for something different. And did you find it? Some days I think so, he said with a small smile. Got my own place about 3 miles past Sarah's. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. Built most of it myself. You live alone? Lillian asked, then immediately flushed at the impropriety of the question. If Elijah was offended, he didn't show it. Just me and my horse and a few cattle. Had a dog, but he passed on last winter. Been meaning to get another. The wagon crested a small hill, and Elijah pointed to a modest farmhouse in the distance. That's Sarah's place. 20 acres, mostly planted in wheat and corn. Has some chickens and a milk cow, too. As they approached, Lillian could see a heavily pregnant woman hanging laundry on a line, a small child playing nearby. The woman turned at the sound of the wagon and waved. That's unusual, Elijah said, his brow furrowing. Sarah doesn't usually manage the laundry alone these days. He pulled the wagon to a stop near the house. The woman Sarah approached, one hand supporting her swollen belly, the other holding her hat in place against the breeze. Her resemblance to Elijah was clear in her blue eyes and the shape of her face, though her hair was darker. You're early, she called to her brother. And you've brought company? Elijah jumped down from the wagon and helped Lillian descend. Sarah, this is Miss Lillian Carter. She's had some trouble in town, and I thought you might be able to use her help. Sarah's eyebrows rose. Hargrove's mail-order bride? At Lillian's surprised look, she chuckled. Mrs. Peterson from the telegraph office sent her boy over with the news not an hour ago. Does everyone know? Lillian asked, mortified. Welcome to small-town life, Sarah said with a sympathetic smile. But don't you worry. Hargrove's reputation isn't nearly as good as he thinks it is. She extended her hand. Sarah Morgan Fisher. And that little tornado over there is my son, James. The boy, who looked to be around 4 years old, had abandoned his play and now hid behind his mother's skirts, peering curiously at Lillian. It's nice to meet you both, Lillian said. Mr. Morgan said you might need some help around the farm. Elijah, he corrected again. Only the bank manager and the preacher get called Mr. around here. Sarah laughed. And he's right about the help. I'm not supposed to be doing the laundry, but Mrs. Peterson's daughter, who usually helps, had to go tend to her grandmother in Denver. She looked Lillian up and down, but unlike Hargrove's appraisal, there was no judgment in her gaze. You ever worked a farm before? No, Lillian admitted. But I'm a quick learner and not afraid of hard work. That's worth more than experience sometimes, Sarah said approvingly. Can you cook? Yes, though mostly simple fare. And I can sew and keep accounts. Accounts? Sarah's eyes lit up. Now that's something we could use. Thomas, my late husband, he handled all that. I've been trying, but numbers were never my strong suit. I'd be happy to help, Lillian offered. I worked for a seamstress in New York who taught me bookkeeping. Well then, Sarah said, wincing slightly as she adjusted her stance, let's get you settled. Elijah, bring in her things while I show her the room. Elijah nodded and retrieved Lillian's carpet bag from the wagon. I'll unload these supplies, then head back to my place. Got a fence that needs mending before dark. Sarah led Lillian into the modest but well-kept farmhouse. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a cast-iron stove, a sturdy table with chairs, and a small sitting area with a rocking chair and handmade quilt draped over a simple sofa. Doorways led to what Lillian presumed were bedrooms. It's not much, Sarah said, but it's home. It's lovely, Lillian said sincerely. After the tenements of New York, the farmhouse felt spacious and welcoming. Sarah showed her to a small bedroom at the back of the house. It held a narrow bed with a straw mattress, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a small chest of drawers. A window looked out on the cornfield beyond. This was Thomas's study, Sarah explained. We cleared it out after. Well, after. I've been using it to store preserves, but we can move those to the root cellar. Are you sure you want to give up the space? Lillian asked. I don't want to impose. You're not imposing if you're helping, Sarah said firmly. And from the looks of things, we might be helping each other. Elijah appeared in the doorway with Lillian's bag. Where do you want this? Just on the bed is fine, Lillian said. He set the bag down and turned to his sister. Need anything else before I go? Sarah shook her head. We'll be fine. Will you come for Sunday dinner? Wouldn't miss it, he replied with a smile. He nodded to Lillian. Nice meeting you, Miss Carter. I'm sure Sarah will keep you plenty busy. After he left, Sarah showed Lillian around the rest of the house and the immediate farm area, the chicken coop, the small barn where they kept the milk cow and 2 horses, and the vegetable garden behind the house. I can't do much bending these days, Sarah admitted, resting a hand on her belly. So the weeds have been winning the battle. I can start on that tomorrow, Lillian offered. For now, how about helping me finish bringing in the laundry? Then we can start supper. James gets awful hungry by sundown. As they worked together, Lillian found herself relaxing for the first time since stepping off the stagecoach. Sarah was easy to talk to, asking questions about New York and Lillian's journey west without prying into painful subjects. By the time they sat down to a simple supper of beans, cornbread, and stewed apples, Lillian felt more at ease than she had in months. James had overcome his shyness and now peppered her with questions about whether she had seen Indians on her journey. She hadn't, and if New York had cowboys, it didn't. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Lillian reflected on the dramatic turn her life had taken in a single day. The humiliation of Hargrove's rejection still stung, but somehow, the kindness of the Morgans had taken much of the bite out of it. She drifted off to sleep with the unfamiliar sounds of the countryside around her, the chirping of crickets, the occasional lowing of the cow, and the whisper of wind through the cornfields. The next morning, Lillian woke at dawn to the crowing of the rooster. She dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, where she found Sarah already up, kneading dough for bread. You're an early riser, Sarah observed with approval. That'll serve you well out here. How can I help? Lillian asked, rolling up her sleeves. Could you fetch some eggs for breakfast? The basket's by the door. Then maybe you could get started on those weeds in the garden while I finish this bread. Lillian's first day on the farm passed in a blur of new experiences. She collected eggs, getting pecked only once, weeded a section of the garden, helped prepare meals, and learned to milk the cow under Sarah's patient instruction. By evening, her hands were blistered and her back ached, but she felt a sense of accomplishment she'd rarely experienced in the city. Days turned into weeks as Lillian settled into the rhythm of farm life. She learned quickly, eager to earn her keep. Sarah taught her to churn butter, preserve vegetables, and bake in the temperamental stove. In return, Lillian organized Sarah's chaotic financial records, discovering that the farm was managing to break even, but with little extra. Elijah visited regularly, always bringing something useful, a repaired tool, fresh game he'd hunted, or news from town. Sometimes he stayed for dinner, entertaining them with stories, or helping with repairs around the farm that Sarah couldn't manage. Lillian found herself looking forward to his visits. Unlike the refined but cold Mr. Hargrove, Elijah was genuine. His hands were calloused from work, his face weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes held a kindness that made her feel safe. One evening in late June, as they sat on the porch after dinner, Sarah watching James chase fireflies in the yard, Elijah turned to Lillian. Hargrove was asking about you in town yesterday, he said quietly. Lillian tensed. What did he want? Apparently, he's reconsidered. Seems the woman he was courting from Denver fell through. Now he's wondering if you might still be available. Available. Lillian repeated, her voice tight. Like merchandise he passed over, but now wants to purchase? Elijah's mouth quirked up at one corner. That's about the size of it. What did you tell him? Told him you were settled elsewhere and not interested in his propositions. Lillian felt a rush of gratitude. Thank you. No need to thank me for telling the truth. Elijah said simply. He hesitated, then added, "You are settled here, aren't you? Sarah says you've been a godsend." "I like it here," Lillian admitted. "It's not what I planned, but it feels right somehow." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. Lillian was acutely aware of Elijah beside her, the clean scent of soap and sunshine that clung to him, the way his forearms looked strong and capable as they rested on his knees. "What did you plan?" he asked finally. "When you came west?" Lillian sighed. "Security, I suppose. After my parents died in the influenza outbreak 3 years ago, I was alone. Working for the seamstress barely kept me fed. When I saw Mr. Hargrove's advertisement, well, it seemed like Providence." "You were willing to marry a man you'd never met?" "Many women do," she pointed out. "And his letters seemed kind. He wrote about wanting companionship, someone to help manage his household. It seemed manageable." "Not love?" Elijah asked, his voice soft. Lillian looked away. "Love is a luxury, isn't it? At least, that's what I thought." "And now?" Before she could answer, Sarah called from inside the house. "Lillian, could you help me with James? It's past his bedtime." The moment broken, Lillian rose quickly. "Of course." By the time she returned to the porch after helping settle James for the night, Elijah had gone, leaving only the lingering scent of leather and pine in his wake. The following Sunday, Elijah arrived for dinner as promised, bringing with him a puppy with floppy ears and a wagging tail. "For James," he explained as the boy squealed with delight. "Every boy needs a dog." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "And who's going to train it not to chase my chickens?" "That'd be me," Elijah assured her. "I'll come by more often to help with that." His eyes met Lillian's briefly, and she felt her cheeks warm. Was that why he'd brought the puppy? To have a reason to visit more frequently? The thought both thrilled and terrified her. She had come west prepared to enter a marriage of convenience with a stranger. But the feelings stirring within her whenever Elijah was near were anything but convenient. They were messy, complicated, and potentially heartbreaking. July brought scorching heat and the impending arrival of Sarah's baby. Lillian took on more responsibilities as Sarah's mobility decreased. She learned to handle the horses, to recognize when the corn was ready for picking, and even to shoot the rifle when foxes threatened the chickens. One sweltering afternoon, as Lillian was hanging laundry while Sarah rested inside, she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Shading her eyes against the sun, she expected to see Elijah. Instead, a gleaming black buggy came into view, driven by none other than Mr. Hargrove. Her stomach clenched as the banker pulled his horses to a stop and descended from the buggy with the same imperious air he displayed on the day of her arrival. "Miss Carter," he called, removing his hat. "I see rural life agrees with you." Lillian set down her laundry basket, conscious of her work-worn dress and hands reddened from the washtub. "Mr. Hargrove, this is unexpected." "I've come to rectify a misunderstanding," he said, approaching her with what he clearly thought was a charming smile. "I may have been hasty in my judgment when you arrived." "There was no misunderstanding," Lillian replied coolly. "You made your position quite clear." Hargrove waved a dismissive hand. "The circumstances were not ideal. You had just completed a long journey, and I was perhaps too concerned with appearances. And now I find myself still in need of a wife," he said, as if conferring a great honor upon her. "You've proven yourself industrious, from what I hear. That has value, even if you lack financial resources." Lillian felt her temper rising. "So, I'm worthy of your consideration now that I've proven I can work?" Hargrove frowned. "There's no need for that tone, Miss Carter. I'm offering you the position you came here to fill. A respectable marriage, a comfortable home in town. Surely that's preferable to laboring as a farmhand." Before Lillian could respond, the front door opened and Sarah appeared, one hand supporting her back. "Mr. Hargrove," she said, her voice cool. "I don't recall inviting you to my property." "Mrs. Fisher," he acknowledged with a stiff nod. "I've come to speak with Miss Carter on a private matter." "There's nothing private about it," Lillian said firmly. "Mr. Hargrove is offering me the marriage proposal he rescinded upon my arrival." Sarah's eyebrows shot up. "Is that so? And what brought about this change of heart?" Hargrove's expression tightened. "That's between Miss Carter and myself." "Lillian is part of our household now," Sarah said, moving to stand beside her. "Her welfare concerns me. I assure you, Mrs. Fisher, I can provide far better for her than a struggling widow's farm." "Perhaps in material goods," Sarah replied. "But there are other forms of wealth, Mr. Hargrove, that you seem to lack entirely." The banker's face flushed with anger. "I don't need to be insulted by a woman who can't even keep her farm profitable without charity from her brother." Sarah straightened despite her unwieldy form. "I'd rather accept help from family who cares than marry a man with no character. And that's exactly what I'd advise Lillian to do as well." Hargrove turned to Lillian. "Is this your answer then? You'd rather remain a servant here than be mistress of your own home in town?" Lillian met his gaze steadily. "I'm not a servant here, Mr. Hargrove. I'm family. And yes, that's my answer." His face contorted with rage and humiliation. "You'll regret this decision, Miss Carter. When winter comes and this farm can barely feed itself, remember that you chose pride over comfort." With that, he jammed his hat back on his head, stomped to his buggy, and drove away in a cloud of dust. Sarah let out a long breath. Well, that was exciting. Lillian couldn't help but laugh, the tension draining away. "I'm sorry. I should have sent him away immediately." "Nonsense. It's good to say your piece." Sarah winced suddenly, her hand flying to her belly. "Sarah? Are you all right?" "I think," she said slowly, "that all this excitement might have stirred things up. The baby's coming." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Lillian sent James to fetch Mrs. Peterson, who served as the town's midwife, then prepared the bedroom according to Sarah's instructions. By the time Mrs. Peterson arrived, Sarah's pains were coming regularly. "First babies take their time," Mrs. Peterson assured Lillian, rolling up her sleeves. "But second ones? They tend to hurry." She was right. Just as the sun was setting, Sarah delivered a healthy baby girl, her cries filling the small farmhouse. Lillian, who had stayed to help the midwife, felt tears spring to her eyes at the sight of the tiny red-faced infant. "She's beautiful," she whispered, helping to clean and swaddle the newborn before placing her in Sarah's arms. "Thank you," Sarah said, her face glowing despite her exhaustion. "For everything." She looked down at her daughter. "I think I'll call her Lillian. Lily for short." Lillian's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, Sarah, are you sure?" "Couldn't be more sure," Sarah said firmly. "You've become like a sister to me. I want my daughter to have your strength." After making sure mother and baby were comfortable and James had been introduced to his new sister, Lillian stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The night was clear, stars speckling the vast Colorado sky. She leaned against the porch railing, overcome with emotion. The sound of a horse approaching made her look up. Elijah dismounted before the horse had fully stopped, his face tight with worry. "Mrs. Peterson's boy found me," he explained, taking the porch steps two at a time. Said Sarah's time had come. "Is she? She's fine," Lillian assured him quickly. "And so is your niece." Relief washed over his features. "A girl? Really?" Lillian nodded, smiling. "Born about an hour ago. Healthy and strong, with a good set of lungs." Elijah leaned against the railing beside her, their shoulders almost touching. "And you? You look tired." "It was intense," Lillian admitted, "but beautiful." They stood in companionable silence for a moment. "Saw Hargrove's buggy heading back to town earlier," Elijah said finally. "Looking like a thundercloud." Lillian sighed. He came to renew his proposal. Elijah stiffened beside her. Did he now? Don't worry, she said, touching his arm briefly. I sent him away, rather firmly, with Sarah's help. Good, he said, his voice rough. Man's not worthy of you. The simple statement, delivered with such conviction, made Lillian's heart race. And who would be worthy, Elijah? She asked softly. He turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. Not me, that's for certain. I'm just a simple rancher with calloused hands and not much to offer. I think you have plenty to offer, Lillian countered. Kindness, honesty, a good heart. Those things are worth more than all of Hargrove's money. Elijah reached out slowly, as if afraid she might pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. When you first arrived, all skinny and city pale, I didn't think you'd last a week out here. Lillian laughed. I didn't think so either. But you surprised me, he continued. You're stronger than you look, Lillian Carter. Life hasn't given me much choice, she replied. We all have choices, Elijah said quietly. You chose to stay here rather than go back east. You chose to help my sister when you could have found other work in town. You chose to refuse Hargrove today. They were easy choices, Lillian said. The right ones. Elijah's hand moved to cup her cheek, his touch gentle despite the roughness of his palm. I'm not a wealthy man, Lillian. I have my land, my cattle, and not much else. But watching you these past weeks, seeing how you've bloomed out here, I find myself wanting things I didn't think I wanted anymore. Lillian's breath caught. What things? A home that's more than just a place to sleep. A family. His eyes searched hers. A wife. The word hung between them, laden with meaning. Are you proposing, Elijah Morgan? Lillian asked, her voice barely above a whisper. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Doing a poor job of it, I reckon. Should probably court you proper first. We could do both, Lillian suggested, surprising herself with her boldness. Court while being betrothed. Elijah's smile widened. You've got it all figured out, haven't you?
Hardly, she laughed.
I'm making it up as I go along. His expression sobered. I need you to understand something, Lillian. I'm not offering you wealth or an easy life. Ranching is hard work, and the winters are long out here.
I know that, she said.
But I promise you this, he continued, his voice low and fervent. You'll never go hungry. You'll never be cold. And you'll never doubt for a single day that you are loved and valued exactly as you are. Tears pricked Lillian's eyes. That's more than enough, Elijah. That's everything. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. But Lillian met him halfway, her lips finding his in a kiss that was gentle yet full of promise. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, and Lillian felt as though she'd finally found her way home after a very long journey. When they broke apart, Elijah rested his forehead against hers. I should go see my sister and niece. You should, Lillian agreed, though she made no move to step out of his embrace. She named the baby Lillian, Lily for short. Surprise and pleasure lit Elijah's features. Did she now? That's a fine name. He pressed another quick kiss to Lillian's lips. I'll be quick. Then maybe we could talk some more about this courting while betrothed idea of yours. As Elijah went inside to visit Sarah and the baby, Lillian remained on the porch, looking up at the stars. 6 weeks ago, she had arrived in Silver Creek with nothing but hopes and dreams that had been crushed within minutes. Now, she stood on the threshold of a new life, one she hadn't planned, but that felt absolutely right. The summer passed in a sweet haze of hard work and happiness. True to his word, Elijah courted Lillian properly, bringing small gifts when he visited, taking her for rides to show her the beauty of the surrounding countryside, and always treating her with a respect that made her feel truly valued. They decided to marry in October, after the harvest was in. Sarah, recovering well from childbirth, insisted on hosting the wedding at the farm. "Nothing fancy," she said when Lillian protested that it was too much work. "Just family and a few friends. The way it should be." As the wedding approached, Lillian found herself increasingly drawn to Elijah's ranch. It was larger than Sarah's farm, 160 acres that he'd claimed under the Homestead Act after the war. The cabin he'd built was small but solid, with 2 rooms and a stone fireplace. He'd recently added a covered porch and was in the process of building a separate kitchen that would eventually connect to the main house. "It's not much," he always said when showing her his progress. "It's perfect," she always replied.
And she meant it.
Sometimes they would sit on his porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. On one such evening, as summer waned into early fall, Elijah took her hand in his. "I've been thinking," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "After we're married, would you want to try for children right away? Or wait a while?" The question caught Lillian by surprise. In New York, such matters were never discussed openly, even between betrothed couples. I would like children," she said carefully. "But I'd also like some time for just us first, to get settled." Elijah nodded. "That makes sense. There's no rush." He hesitated, then added, "My mother had 8 children. Only 4 of us survived to adulthood. I don't want that for you, pregnancy after pregnancy, with no rest between." Lillian's heart swelled at his consideration. So many men gave no thought to the toll childbearing took on women's bodies. "Thank you for caring about that." "I care about you," he said simply. "Your happiness, your health, all of it." She leaned against his shoulder, content. "I never expected this when I came west." "What's that?" "To find someone who sees me, really sees me. Not what I can provide or what I'm worth, but just
Me.
Elijah turned to face her, his expression serious. "You know what Hargrove said that day still makes my blood boil? That you weren't rich enough for him." Lillian sighed. "Well, he wasn't wrong. I had nothing to bring to a marriage except myself. And that's worth everything," Elijah said fiercely. "You're rich in all the ways that matter, Lillian. In kindness, in courage, in heart. Any man would be fortunate to have you, rich or poor." "I'm glad it's you who think so," she whispered, leaning in to kiss him. Their kisses had grown more passionate as their wedding approached, and this one was no exception. Elijah's arms tightened around her, pulling her close as their lips moved together. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. "October seems very far away," Elijah murmured against her hair. Lillian laughed softly. "It's only 6 weeks." "6 very long weeks," he groaned, but his eyes twinkled with good humor. "But worth waiting for." The weeks leading up to the wedding were busy ones. The harvest demanded long hours from everyone, and preparations for the ceremony, simple though it would be, still required attention. Lillian sewed her own wedding dress from fabric Elijah had bought in Denver, a soft blue rather than traditional white, practical enough to wear again for church and special occasions. 2 weeks before the wedding, disaster struck. A fire broke out in the dry fields of a neighboring ranch, and high winds drove it toward both Sarah's farm and Elijah's ranch. Every able-bodied person in the area came to fight the blaze, digging fire breaks and beating back flames with wet blankets. Lillian worked alongside the men, her face blackened with soot, her arms aching from wielding a shovel. By morning, they had saved both properties, though one of Elijah's outer pastures was scorched and several of Sarah's outbuildings had sustained damage. As dawn broke over the smoking landscape, Elijah found Lillian sitting exhausted on a fallen log, watching as the last embers were doused. "You're a sight," he said, dropping down beside her. His own face was streaked with ash, his clothing singed in places. "So are you," she replied with a tired smile. He took her hands, examining the blisters that had formed despite the gloves she'd worn. "These need tending."
"Later," she said.
How bad is the damage? Could have been much worse, Elijah admitted. Lost some grazing land, but the house and barn are intact. Sarah's place took more of a hit. That old storage shed is gone, and the chicken coop will need rebuilding. Lillian nodded, too tired to speak. They had been lucky. She had heard stories of entire homesteads being wiped out by prairie fires, families left with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Elijah put his arm around her shoulders. You were amazing out there. You know, not many women would have worked the line all night like you did. I was protecting our future, she said simply. His arm tightened around her. Our future, he repeated, a note of wonder in his voice. I like the sound of that. The fire set back their wedding preparations, as rebuilding the damaged structures took priority. But on October 12, 1875, Lillian stood in Sarah's parlor in her blue dress, a wreath of late wildflowers in her hair, ready to become Mrs. Elijah Morgan. The ceremony was simple, just the local minister, Sarah and her children, and a handful of neighbors who had become friends over the summer. Hargrove, of course, was not among them, though Lillian had heard he'd finally found a bride, a banker's daughter from Pueblo, who came with a substantial dowry. As Lillian spoke her vows, looking into Elijah's clear blue eyes, she felt a sense of rightness that transcended her wildest hopes when she'd boarded that stagecoach in New York. This wasn't a marriage of convenience or necessity. It was a union born of mutual respect, shared values, and deep affection that had blossomed into love. I now pronounce you man and wife, the minister declared. You may kiss your bride. Elijah's kiss was gentle but full of promise, his hands cradling her face as if she were something precious. When they turned to face their small gathering of well-wishers, Lillian's heart felt so full it might burst. The celebration afterward was modest, a meal prepared by Sarah and neighboring women, music provided by a fiddler from town, and dancing in the yard as the autumn sun cast long shadows across the land that had become Lillian's home. As the evening wound down, Elijah led his new wife to the wagon he'd decorated with ribbons and wildflowers. Their friends showered them with wheat grains for prosperity as they climbed up and drove away toward Elijah's ranch, their ranch now. When they arrived, Elijah surprised her by lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Welcome home, Mrs. Morgan, he said, setting her down gently in the main room of the cabin. Lillian looked around at the simple space he'd prepared for their life together. A new quilt brightened the bed in the corner. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, curtains she recognized as ones she'd sewn in the evenings at Sarah's. A fire burned cheerfully in the stone fireplace, taking the chill off the October evening. It's perfect, she said, meaning it with all her heart. Elijah came to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. It's just a beginning. I plan to add more rooms as our family grows. Maybe even a proper second floor someday. Lillian turned in his arms to face him. I don't need a mansion, Elijah. Just you, is more than enough. His eyes darkened as he bent to kiss her, this time without the restraint he'd shown in front of the minister and their guests. Lillian responded eagerly, her hands finding their way into his hair as the kiss deepened. Later, as they lay together in the darkness, Lillian's head resting on Elijah's chest, he traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Happy? He asked softly. Completely, she assured him, pressing a kiss to his skin. Are you? More than I ever thought possible, he admitted. When I saw you that day in town, standing there with your chin up despite Hargrove's cruelty, something in me just knew. Knew what? That you were someone special. Someone worth knowing. He chuckled. Though I'll admit, I didn't expect to fall in love quite so fast or quite so hard. Lillian smiled in the darkness. Neither did I. But I'm glad we did. The seasons turned, and Lillian settled into her new life as Mrs. Morgan. The work was hard, just as Elijah had warned, but deeply satisfying. They rose before dawn each day to tend to the animals and worked until dusk, falling into bed tired but content. Winter came early that year, blanketing the mountains and valleys in snow by mid-November. The cold was fierce, far more biting than the New York winters Lillian had known, but the cabin was snug, and Elijah had laid in plenty of firewood. They spent the long evenings planning for the future. Elijah wanted to expand his herd in the spring, perhaps even begin breeding horses. Lillian had ideas for a larger vegetable garden and maybe some fruit trees, if they could get them to survive the harsh climate. "I've been thinking," Elijah said one night as they sat before the fire, Lillian mending one of his shirts while he cleaned his rifle. "The stage line is looking for someone to run a way station about 5 miles east of here. Offer room and board to passengers, change out the horses, that sort of thing." Lillian looked up from her sewing. "Are you considering it?" "Might be," he admitted. "It's steady income, which would help with expanding the herd. And the company would build the station house on our land, a good-sized one with rooms for guests." "It would be a lot of work," Lillian pointed out, "on top of what we already do."
True.
"But it would also bring in cash money, which is always scarce out here." He set the rifle aside. "But I won't do it if you're against it. It would change things for both of us." Lillian considered the idea. "I'm not against it. Actually, I think I might enjoy having more people coming through. And I'm a good cook. I could provide meals for the passengers." Elijah smiled. "That you are. Your biscuits alone would make the station famous." She swatted his arm playfully. "Flatterer." "Just honest," he countered, pulling her onto his lap. "So, you think we should consider it?" "I think we should at least talk to them about the details," Lillian agreed. "It could be a good opportunity." He kissed her softly. "Have I told you lately how lucky I am that Hargrove was such a fool?" Lillian laughed. "Not since yesterday." "Well, I am," Elijah insisted. "His loss was definitely my gain." Spring came late but vigorously, the melting snow feeding rushing streams and causing the meadows to explode with wildflowers. Lillian, who had spent the winter months learning to make cheese from their cow's milk and experimenting with preserving techniques for the coming summer's produce, was eager to begin work on her expanded garden. She was turning over the soil one bright April morning when she felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. Steadying herself on the hoe, she took a deep breath of the crisp mountain air. The dizziness had been happening more frequently in recent weeks, along with the persistent tiredness that she'd attributed to the change of seasons. But as she straightened, another symptom made itself known, a queasiness that had her rushing to the edge of the garden. After emptying her breakfast into the grass, Lillian sat back on her heels, a dawning realization spreading through her. "Lillian?" Elijah's voice called from the barn where he'd been repairing tack. "You all right?" "Fine," she called back automatically, though her mind was racing. She counted back the weeks since her last monthly course. 8 weeks? No, closer to 10. Elijah appeared at the garden gate, concern etched on his features. "You don't look fine. You're pale as a ghost." Lillian stood carefully, brushing dirt from her skirts. "I think. That is, I believe." She took a deep breath. "Elijah, I think I might be with child." His expression transformed from concern to wonder in an instant. "A baby? Really?" She nodded, a smile beginning to form despite her lingering nausea. "I can't be certain yet, but all the signs are there." In 2 strides, Elijah was beside her, lifting her off her feet in a gentle embrace. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Lillian asked, though his reaction left little doubt. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Elijah said, setting her carefully back on her feet. "But what about you? We talked about waiting a while." "Life has its own timing," Lillian said simply. "And yes, I'm happy too. A little scared, but mostly happy." Elijah rested his hand gently on her still, flat stomach. "A family of our own." "We should wait to tell people," Lillian cautioned. "Until we're more certain. And until—well, until the risky early months have passed. Understanding darkened Elijah's expression. The previous winter, a neighbor's wife had lost a baby in her 4th month, plunging the whole community into mourning. Whatever you think is best. But Sarah will guess soon enough she's been through it twice. Lillian nodded. We'll tell her first then. Next Sunday, when we go for dinner. Despite their intention to keep the news private, Sarah took one look at Lillian the following Sunday and broke into a knowing smile. When are you due? She asked directly as they helped prepare dinner, little Lily babbling happily in a basket nearby. Lillian's eyes widened. How did you know? Same way my mother knew with me, and her mother before her, Sarah chuckled. There's a certain glow about you. And you're holding yourself differently protective-like. Late November, I think, Lillian admitted. If my calculations are correct. Sarah squeezed her hand. I'm so happy for you both. And a bit selfishly happy for Lily, too. She'll have a cousin close to her age to grow up with. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer, though the morning sickness lingered longer than Lillian had expected. Elijah was attentive to the point of being overprotective, insisting she rest during the hottest part of the day and taking on more than his share of the chores. I'm pregnant, not made of glass, Lillian protested one afternoon when he refused to let her help with the haying. Humor me, Elijah replied, kissing her forehead. This is my first time at this, and I'm bound to be a bit overcautious. By August, Lillian's condition was impossible to hide. Her slender frame now sported a definite roundness, and she'd had to let out all her dresses. The stage line had agreed to build their way station, with construction set to begin the following spring, after the baby's arrival. In the meantime, Elijah had begun building a cradle from pine wood, carefully sanding each piece to silky smoothness. One warm evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lillian felt a flutter in her belly, like the wings of a butterfly. She gasped, her hand flying to the spot. What is it? Elijah asked, immediately alert. Pain. No, Lillian breathed, wonder suffusing her voice. The baby moved. I felt it. Elijah's hand joined hers, though he looked disappointed when he couldn't feel anything. Too soon for that, I reckon. Soon enough, Lillian assured him. Sarah says it won't be long before the kicks are strong enough for you to feel too. As summer turned to fall, Lillian found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed in a single year. Last October, she had been a new bride, starting a life with the man she loved. Now, she was preparing to welcome their child into the world. The baby's movements grew stronger, sometimes visible through her clothing as an elbow or foot pressed against her stretched skin. Elijah delighted in placing his hand on her belly in the evenings, his face lighting up each time he felt a kick or roll. Strong little thing, he would say proudly. Takes after its mother. November arrived with an early snow that blanketed the ranch in white. Lillian, now in her final weeks of pregnancy, moved more slowly, her back aching constantly from the weight of the child. She had everything prepared: clean linens, baby clothes sewn from soft flannel, the cradle positioned near their bed. Sarah had promised to come stay when the time grew near, and Mrs. Peterson would attend the birth, as she had with Sarah's children. Still, Lillian couldn't help feeling anxious. Childbirth was dangerous, especially so far from a doctor or hospital. Stop worrying, Elijah said one night, rubbing her feet as they sat before the fire. You're strong and healthy. Everything will be fine. How do you know? Lillian asked, voicing her fears. So many things could go wrong. Because I have faith, he said simply. In God, in Mrs. Peterson's experience, and most of all in you. His confidence bolstered her spirits, and when the first pains came 3 days later, Lillian faced them with as much courage as she could muster. Sarah arrived within hours of Elijah's breathless summons, and Mrs. Peterson not long after. The labor was long, nearly 20 hours from the first twinge to the final push. Through it all, Elijah remained nearby, bringing water, heating towels, and occasionally allowed into the bedroom to hold Lillian's hand and whisper encouragement. As dawn broke on November 18th, 1876, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears to both parents' eyes. "A fine, healthy boy," Mrs. Peterson announced, wrapping the red-faced infant in a clean blanket before placing him in Lillian's arms. Exhausted but radiant, Lillian looked down at the tiny face of their child. He had a tuft of dark hair, and when he briefly opened his eyes, she saw they were the deep blue of all newborns. "He's perfect," she whispered as Elijah perched carefully on the edge of the bed, his arm around her shoulders. "Just like his mother," Elijah agreed, his voice thick with emotion. He touched the baby's cheek gently with one finger.
Innocent.
"What will you call him?" Sarah asked from where she stood nearby, her own eyes damp with happy tears. Lillian and Elijah exchanged a look. They had discussed names but hadn't settled on one. "Thomas," Lillian said suddenly. "Thomas Elijah Morgan." Elijah's eyes widened in surprise. "After Sarah's husband?" Lillian nodded. "If Sarah doesn't mind. He was your friend, and... well, if he hadn't passed, I might never have come to stay with Sarah. Never have met you." Sarah pressed a hand to her mouth, clearly moved. "I think that's a wonderful tribute." "Thomas it is, then," Elijah agreed, bending to kiss first Lillian's forehead, then the downy head of their son. "Welcome to the family, Thomas Elijah Morgan." The winter of 1876-1877 was one of the harshest in memory, with blizzards that sometimes kept them snowbound for days at a time. But inside the Morgan cabin, warmth and love abounded. Thomas thrived, growing plump on his mother's milk and delighting his parents with each new accomplishment, the first real smile, the first time he rolled over, the first laugh. By spring, construction began on the stage line's way station. Lillian, having regained her strength, divided her time between caring for Thomas and helping Elijah with the ranch work. The routine was exhausting but deeply satisfying. "I've been thinking," Elijah said one evening as they sat on their porch, Thomas sleeping peacefully in Lillian's arms. "Maybe we should have Hargrove over for dinner when the station is finished." Lillian looked at him in surprise. "Whatever for?" A mischievous smile played around Elijah's lips. "Just to show him what he missed out on. Beautiful wife, healthy son, thriving ranch, new business venture." Lillian laughed softly, mindful of the sleeping baby. "That's terribly petty, Elijah Morgan." "Maybe so," he admitted. "But sometimes I think about how close I came to never meeting you. If Hargrove hadn't been such a fool that day, then I believe something else would have brought us together," Lillian said with conviction. "Some things are just meant to be." Elijah leaned over to kiss her, careful not to disturb Thomas. "I believe you're right, Mrs. Morgan. Some things are just meant to be." As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Lillian reflected on the strange, winding path that had led her here. From the crowded tenements of New York to this peaceful porch in Colorado. From a desperate mail-order bride to a beloved wife and mother. Hargrove had deemed her too poor to marry, measuring her worth in dollars rather than character. But Elijah had seen beyond her empty pockets to the richness of her heart. In doing so, he had given her the greatest wealth of all, a love that grew stronger with each passing day, a family to call her own, and a place where she truly belonged. "What are you thinking about?" Elijah asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Lillian smiled, looking from her husband to their sleeping son and out to the land that was their home. "Just how rich we are," she said softly, "in all the ways that truly matter." And as Elijah's arm tightened around her shoulders, Lillian knew that no bank account or fine house could ever compare to the fortune she had found on that fateful day when a kind-hearted cowboy had looked at a rejected mail-order bride and declared, "You're rich enough for me."